All right. Well, we have the dynamic trio here.
The
Hey,
three amigos.
the amigos. Well, we have a special guest today, attorney Michael Huff.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. And just can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you specialize in?
Sure. So, kind of an interesting background, I guess. I was a police officer in my former life, which sort of shapes and forms my investigations now as an attorney. I've been in practice for approximately 10 years, and I've had a general litigation practice, basically dealing with businesses, small business owners, landlords, and so forth, dealing with disputes, and been fortunate enough to settle the majority of those matters expeditiously, which is the focal point of my practice. And now we're pivoting with the pandemic, COVID-19, we're pivoting to really do deep dives on how the new laws will be impacting really across the board, and kind of taking it with broad strokes as new laws are being implemented. We used to say every day you wake up, but I've literally watched new legislation be passed, changed, revised, and sent back out to us, at least from the Judicial Council. New updates that are that contravene what was told to us just the day before. So staying abreast of the COVID-19 laws and how they impact our Californians here, and then also with a focus on real estate, mostly the litigation and dispute resolution side of things, but also in ramping up to assist realtors like you guys with transactional side as well.
Awesome. Okay, so since no, it's great, and you've been really helpful when I have questions or when my clients need help. So really
Thank
thank you
you.
for all your expertise. Well, if so for people who don't really know you, who are your typical clients? Like, who do you usually serve?
So fortunately, the general practice along with the real estate side allows me to have a wide variety of client base. So primarily it's business owners. My larger clients own their own mid-sized to small businesses. I have handled matters for landlords, usually in landlord-tenant disputes, and a few individuals dealing with higher economic or issues that they have with, sometimes it's familial, not family law, but sometimes it's interacting with the different disputes that arise during family trust. Pretty much if there's a dispute involved, you can come to Huff Legal and we can help you.
Got you. Okay, well that's good to know. Since so you did mention about like the new pandemic and a lot of the things that there's been a lot of updates, and what would you say are new updates or just things that have really drastically changed in your line of business?
Gosh, well, first and foremost, the majority of the counties, the most populous counties in California, have closed the courts to all but felony criminal actions and civil harassment on the civil side. So as you guys are aware, there's been a complete halt in the property courts. So landlord tenant, any other disputes really, which is everything other than felony crimes and civil harassment, there's not in our lifetime, and really I don't know back to the Spanish flu in the 1800s since we've seen such a wrench thrown into the legal industry itself. So first and foremost, the communication barriers that even though we have internet and cell phones and so forth, and court call where we can appear. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments via court call. I don't believe that that's been done ever in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. So communications has been key. Quite frankly, keeping up with all of the laws and the dynamics of how they're changing so quickly. It's not just our own conduct with the shelter-in-place orders. For example, the mask. Initially, no one needed to wear masks, and now they're mandatory, and you can be fined or jailed if you don't wear the mask. So the same sort of dynamics, we're seeing that happen in the law, which leaves us sort of balancing and walking a tightrope, so to speak, as we find out what case law will be meted out from the things that transpire today. So there'll be a lot of questions probably that you ask that I'll take my cue from Governor Newsom, who says we'll just touch on each thing with broad strokes. The reason is because the fine points are not available right now.
Mm. Yeah, it is a day by day thing, and I think it's just like Ed. You know, we're in even in the real estate industry, we're constantly like every day is a new day, or trying to figure out like what banks are doing what and what changes has happened to affect our clients who want to buy or sell, and um,
Sometimes it's by the hour. I mean,
Right.
literally in our industry, things are changing so much. I got a question for you, and this is Ed with Kuno Advisors. You know, like I mentioned, we've been changing rules and guidelines so much, so frequently. Now there's this flight towards having appraisers maybe do a drive by, maybe look into the window. They're peering in, they're doing a couple measurements, and they're out. What kind of legal implications do you think this is going to bubble up or percolate in the future if problems arise in that property because more due diligence was not had on the appraisal side?
Right. So the California Real Estate Association of Realtors actually put out a guidelines for the realtors' conduct, which also, by extension, applies to inspectors, appraisers, sellers, and buyers. I think foremost, before we even reach the legal issues, that wise counsel and prudent counsel will be for realtors, especially, to make themselves intimately familiar with those guidelines. It outlines a litany of, I think, about 10 or so action items that realtors should take. Foremost, that pretty much if in-person communication or contact can be avoided, it should be, right. So virtual showings, schedule, and then there's the requirement that the realtor can only have two other individuals inside of the residence at the same time, so a total of three people. Again, that makes it difficult. I can imagine, I've never shown a house, but if you have to be 6 feet away from someone inside of a studio, I don't know how you could do that. Or I guess in a single family home, you'd have more wingspan, but that becomes an issue, and the viability of actually complying with the guidelines, and later what I imagine will become set regulations and procedures, right. So foremost, there's just sort of being familiar with those guidelines and keeping in step with those so that you don't raise the legal issues. I think where we're going to run into issues, especially, is where the interplay is between people's privacy rights to privacy. For example, in one of the guidelines, the seller is required now to disclose whether they've had cold, flu symptoms, and or tested positive for COVID to any realtor showing the resident, and or to any buyer. So you can imagine the sort of throngs of privacy actions that may or may not arise, and is it a criminal act for failure to do so, right?
Mm.
Because now, if I know that I'm infected with something and I intentionally do an act to infect you, obviously the mens rea and the mental culpability is there. But what's your intent if you have COVID or flu, or you sneezed? Where's the line between my cold symptoms? How high does my temperature have to be? So all of the intricacies that we have to look at to figure out what's going to be the proper framework to guide the majority of people, it's really up in the air. So if you can imagine it, it's likely to become a legal problem. Trespass, possibility of trespass violations. Fortunately, I work with great realtors like Fatima, so I don't worry too much about the use of common sense. I know that she calls ahead. I understand a lot of her procedures are very in step with erring on the side of caution. And so I haven't run into any issues like that with working with Fatima, right? But I
Right.
have to admit that we're not so fortunate all of the time, and whether by oversight or ignorance, people do overstep what is actually going to keep them out of trouble, and they fall into a number of legal pitfalls in so doing.
Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be any kind of, once it's all said and done, when a transaction's consummated, if that transaction had a not so in-depth appraisal done, meaning that they just maybe did a AVM, which is an automated valuation model, they just maybe did a desk review, they didn't really go into the property per se, and then issues arise after. Do you
Mhm.
think we're going to see more litigation in that arena because now all of a sudden full appraisals are not being done?
Well, I think, just like our Constitution as a living, breathing document in the sense that it constantly has to morph and change and grow with us and adapt with us in our time, so will the laws that apply to regulations in dealing with any of the transactions that occur. I think the issue is that contracts, any documentation that memorialized such agreements that had the sort of quick and dirty version of appraisals will be pre-pandemic writing, and so how were the issue will become in the courts, how were the participants of that contract, how were the parties able to accurately foresee and anticipate um, an entirely unforeseeable event, as in what is force majeure or an act of God, right? So we're running into issues where people were not in a position on either side. So is in fact that contract valid, where we did not have a meeting on the minds on what we could otherwise articulate as a material issue in the contract, right?
Right, right.
It's the heart of the contract. What is the value of this property? What will it be appraised at? And so if we're not able to do that with the type of accuracy that's necessary, then I think on the seller side, how can we really penalize them when they're not really the ones holding any smoking gun?
That's a good point, because maybe what's going to happen is part of at least intermediate, how much of the new normal, so to speak, or new world order when it comes to due diligence, the definition of due diligence will be challenged. What does that mean? Now we're in the C19 era, if you will, especially in real estate, and how will that be interpreted by
Sure.
law in the courts? Because as you mentioned earlier, I mean, all industries have been disturbed, and the legal industry has not been immune to that.
No,
Everything's
absolutely
changing,
not.
like you mentioned.
Right. And I think you make a really good point, Ed. Things are absolutely going to shape and change. I think the cure, just sort of shooting from the hip as we feel this out together, is planning ahead, right? So social distancing and keeping protected for the appraiser if a deep dive is needed certainly can be worked out with proper planning. And so I think we have to be really careful as we balance what the competing interests are,
Mm.
because what often happens is a slippery slope, which is usually kind of used airy fairy as a policy argument. Oh no, if we do this in one state, then it'll tear across the country. It's a slippery slope, and when will it stop, right? And then
We don't
everyone's
want it to set
crazy.
precedent or
Right,
something,
yes,
right?
got to set that precedent and stare decisis, exactly. And really what I think is governing the behavior so that it's prudent, right? Because like it or not, as we do adapt to the changes, there inevitably will be the group of people who play it fast and loose because they believe that they can get away with it. And
Right.
so rather than doing even reasonable due diligence based on reasonable care, they do these short shrift C19 appraisals, right? And that's supposed to pass muster because we're in the midst of a pandemic. I think what people will find is that once the courts are back opened and we're all in our appropriate places, that cooler minds will prevail, and that will not be allowed.
I completely agree. So on that note, because there's always gamers in every situation, right? There's always somebody trying to one up the other person. There's always that. Good thing that that contingency is small when you look at the population as a whole. What do you recommend folks that are going to either buy or sell? What are the things you recommend that they really dot their I's and cross their T's on, now that we're in C19 era, to protect themselves, both on the buyer side and also on the seller side? The good news is that we're seeing a lot more cooperation and goodwill in these
Right.
transactions,
And
which I'm very happy about, by the way.
we are to an extent, and I should say you probably are. I hear the stories. I see the not goodwill. I see the bad will. That's why they
Yeah,
call me. No one calls me because they wanted to share a lovely story with me.
right.
It's
Yeah, how they
usually
avoided having to hire you.
right, exactly. Yeah, no
Right.
one calls me to find out how not to hire me. They call me when we can't even get separated now because the problems are usually that big. But I think the response for both buyers and sellers alike is really the same. Understanding that there's not as much expendable income or surplus income, if you will, I would say, unless, and this is not just to put a feather in Fatima's cap, I've worked with a number of realtors. She actually is one of my favorite realtors because of the deep due diligence. Oftentimes, the amount of, yeah, don't let that go to your head. There's only so much room. Just kidding.
These Zoom meeting blocks are only so
Right.
big, people.
All of a sudden, it's just
Here,
Fatima.
Look, she
So,
looks more and more like Shirley Temple.
there you go. So I think if you have a highly skilled realtor like Fatima, who I know does the due diligence, I would say not until the very end, if at all, would my law practice be needed, because she will take the prudent steps. She will be abreast of what's going on in the guidelines and be able to comport and adapt her practice accordingly, right? I think that it is key whether or not it's worth the additional funds, I should say, at this point, to pay an attorney, whether it's my office or another, but a real estate attorney and or contracts attorney to review it. And a lot of attorneys now are turning to what's called bundled services or unbundled services. And so you can hire, rather than retaining an attorney for 1,500, 2,500, 5,000, 10,000, so forth, it goes piecemeal. So if you need a representation letter and a demand letter based on a retainer agreement that says my office is only representing you for this specific item, right? And any additional work will require an addendum to this agreement. And that way the clients are able, buyers or sellers are able to retain counsel at a minimal fee, say $500 for the initial letter and demand letter. And then if there's responsive correspondence that's required, that can be done on a step scale basis. And also, I like to adjust, and a number of my colleagues are adjusting to the times by adjusting our fees based on the scale of what the person is able to pay for a legal fee. So there are a number of things I think that buyers and sellers can do, but certainly using learned intermediaries such as realtors and attorneys for reviewing anything, it really is essential. And I prefer a carrot to a stick, right? And so fear tactics and fear mongering that drive people into law firms really have no place in my mind. But understanding when it is a legitimate time to involve counsel is really important. And this is that time, because if attorneys, and they are having difficulty corresponding with clerks of court, the intake person and so forth, and it's nearly impossible. I spent half of a day last week trying to reach someone in Santa Cruz County, Watsonville court, and I never did. And that's on a criminal matter where the individual is detained in jail. So these are really serious civil liberties and contractual rights that are tied into the real estate transactions. So first and foremost, read everything. Don't sign anything unless you have, at the very least, a fresh pair of eyes. Have Ed look it over for you, because our three minds together, it may end up on my desk and I can look it over. But come with backup. So that's the first thing. And then also don't be short shrift on looking at casting the net wide as to the availability of additional funds, not just microloans and loans that have to be paid back, but the disaster relief fund that's out now has the $10,000 advance.
EIDL.
Right, EIDL, that's forgivable. There's a number of different programs within the CARES Act that offer relief as well. So really taking advantage, as should be done, of the resources that are available. And again, and maybe it's just me, but I do this for a living, and I'm finding it challenging swimming through all of it with the volume of materials that you see the new law or what it might be, and then of course myself and 10 other attorneys write a blog or an article about it, and all of us are right in some way based on case law, but everybody's wrong as well because it's the coronavirus. So really just having backup, having additional parties weigh in on it, and I would think that the more is better in this case.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. I think people should have counsel for big purchases like this on retainer, and they should be reviewing it. There's just no if, ands, or buts about it. It's important. There's the old adage: you measure twice, cut once. You don't
Measure.
want to be on the other end where you're cutting way too much, and then later on,
Exactly.
it's going to cost you more money to redo it, more time.
And I know we're on a video, Ed, but if I could, just for my own edification, could you tell me a little bit about what you do and how it ties in with Fatima?
Yeah, so I'm a mortgage broker, and I've been in the mortgage business a little over 20 years. Before that, I was a stockbroker, financial advisor, and then I was also a commercial banker. So I bring kind of a very well-rounded financial background, and the pillars of my business. While I do mortgages, what I tell people is that I really hang my hat on education, advice, and resources. So I'm the guy that will talk you out of refinancing if the numbers don't pencil,
Hmm.
but I'm also the guy who will show you how you can get things done ethically and legally.
Hmm.
And sometimes that means two-stepping things. Sometimes, you can't hit a home run every single time you come up to bat, but I can teach you how to hit a single, a double, or a triple and get on base and then get into home plate, right? So I'm that guy, which is the reason why I became a mortgage broker. I did not want to be beholden to one bank. I wanted to not work for a bank. I wanted to work for the client. And that means giving them real honest advice, and I wanted to give them access to a lot of lenders so that I wouldn't, by the very nature of working for only one, I would be biased to
Right.
only go to what the bank decides are going to be the programs, if that makes any sense. So now I get to be a true mortgage advisor, right? And I
That's
own this company. And so it's a little different because I run it, funny enough, before even COVID, I had everybody I had them remote. And the reason being is because I wanted to run it mean and lean so that then I can pass on really great rates to my clients, right? Because, of course, it's not cheap to live here. And I know how much sacrifice and how much time and effort goes into buying a house, particularly when you look at the fact that our down payments are the price of houses in other states.
exactly, exactly. Do you have any financial institutions who you like to deal with regularly? Do you deal with larger banks as well as smaller financial institutions, or how does that shore up for you? I
Yeah,
have
I,
clients that
I
ask me this all the time, and I
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I tell people I'm like a custom shoemaker. Everybody has a different shoe size and they want a different shoe. So I custom make it for you, meaning that I got lenders that cover the gamut, everything from the big ones all the way down to private money. I did a deal. This was an interesting story. I'll just tell it really quickly so you get the breadth of the offering here. I was called at about 5:45 p.m. on a Friday. This investor wanted to purchase a flip property, and I guess their financing was going south, and they were referred to me. We had approval that Sunday, we had docs that Wednesday, and we funded that Friday. So all within a week at 90% loan to value on a flip investment property,
wow.
which good luck for trying to find that. But again, this is an art and a science. So we meld both. We want to meld the right brain with the left brain, and we want to put things together that maybe other people just didn't think about. Part of that is, and this is the collaboration and the reason why Fatima and I, who are kindred spirits and have the same operating system and core values,
Hmm.
is that we will have that conversation with a client where we'll say, look, I know you want to buy a single family residence, but unfortunately, right now, the numbers don't pencil that way. But how about this as food for thought? Because you and other people I know that want to buy as well. Why don't we buy a duplex instead of a single family residence? And then once the equity goes up, let's go ahead and create another transaction where you get to sell either your side or both of you sell each other's sides, take the proceeds, and then go buy single family residences as you had planned originally, which is the two step that I'm talking about. So we really take the time to really listen to clients. We take the time to really let our brains aerate, to really think about options for them instead of just trying to churn and burn the transaction. That's not who we are, which no coincidence that both her and I have been in the business a long time. We've seen people, what happened in 2008, we survived that. Matter of fact, we thrived after that. And we can hang our hats proudly because we know that people were better off with us than without us.
That's great. That's great. One follow-up question, if I can. I noticed that, or Governor Newsom mentioned that I guess Bank of America is the only large financial institution that's not participating in facilitating the funds that are available, right? Like they're not there as a go-to institution. Have you heard anything about that? Is that impactful? Do you think that will have an impact on your client base at least, or what should I be telling my clients with respect to that big and heavy not being in the
Yeah,
race?
I I don't know a lot of detail about that. I do know that Chase announced that they were going to do 20% down minimum and a median score of 700 minimum, which essentially what they're really saying is, look, we want to be in the very safe lending business, right?
Right.
That's what they're saying. They're saying, I don't want the other people. Bank of America, I don't know that particular story, but I can't say that it surprises me. Uh, Quite frankly, Bank of America has been a bit disappointing. You know, over the years, they've fallen short on their procedures. I've experienced it a few times myself with transactions, and it's unfortunate because the original Bank of Italy by AP Giannini was quite the contrary, right? It was more of grassroots. Matter of fact, AP Giannini, if memory serves me correct, was the only person in the Depression handing out loans on a handshake, literally. And
Wow.
so if you think about present day, you know, banking in general has morphed a lot, but I think depending on what leadership looks like is going to depend on how they mitigate or how they view mitigating risk. And some of them are taking measures that just don't really have a lot of common sense, but you know, the old saying is common sense isn't common. The
Right.
good news, to reel that back in, because I like to keep things positive, is the fact that your everyday consumer has a lot of options. Now the question is, do they have access to knowing that these options exist? Because just to borrow from law, think about it. If you don't know you have a right, then you don't have it. You can't exercise a right you don't know you have. So for my clients, because my offering is so robust as far as options, they're not going to see it because I'm going to be the fastest dolphin in that ocean. I promise you that. I'm going to pivot really quick because again, I work for the client, not for a bank anymore. Have I in the past? Of course, because that's how careers are, right? There's a whole progression there. But now that I am in control as to the offering, I make sure that that offering is robust. So, for example, when they announced that a lot of banks were getting out of the jumbo loans, well, I made some phone calls. I want to find out who's doing them.
Mhm.
And if they're doing them, what are their rates? Because I'll give you an example. Recently, yesterday, I was pricing out a loan. Lady wants to buy $1.6 million house, putting $600,000 down, which is a little over 30%. One of the lenders said, "Yeah, sure, we'll do that deal." I said, "Okay, what's your pricing?" They wanted $38,000 in points to get a 5.5% rate. I said, I don't think so.
Yep. That's
That
horrible.
ain't gonna happen. Not under my watch.
Right.
That ain't gonna happen. So I had to go and look more and more and more and more. And look, if I need to do two loans, you know, a conforming first and then an equity line second, it's much better than getting a 5.5% at 38 grand,
Right.
right? See, so we pivot quickly.
Yep.
So the short answer is not really, not affecting my folks. And here's the other thing: this is a prime example of what I'm talking about. The fact that we're doing this video says a lot about our present company. The fact that A, we are connectors.
Mhm.
B, we're collaborators. And three, we're here to disseminate information so that the access gets pushed out, right? That more and more people get access to information. We're living proof right now because there's other things we could be doing, but we voted today. We
Absolutely.
voted that this is what we would be doing, that this is the way we're going to run our business. You know how many selfies are happening right now? You know how many people are telling us what they just cooked for lunch or they're about to cook for dinner? I'm not saying that's wrong.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that if you're doing that 99% of your time, I think you kind of missed the mark. That life ain't about us. It's about us in the lives of others. And not to pontificate, but this is how we run our business. This is the reason why Every other word you say about Fatima is 100% accurate because it's true. It's not, see, here's what I'm going to say. It's not that she's a great realtor. That is a byproduct of the fact that she is an awesome person who decided to allow her awesomeness from her life to spill over into real estate. This is the part that I want people to really understand about the difference between the transactionalists and the people who become iconic in their industries. And it's not about ego because we don't care.
Sure.
We don't care how much money you have and how many deals you do a month. This is
Right.
the reason, one of the reasons why, and I'm just going to say it right now. A lot of people are going to get mad at me, but I don't hang out with a lot of mortgage people because all you do is talk about how many deals you do. I don't care. I don't.
I know. I told him, okay, check it out. We are running out of time. I guess I don't have the upgraded version like you
You got to be careful when you ask me questions.
I understand.
There's a lot of questions out there. How do people get a hold of you, Michael?
Great. Yeah, I prefer right now because honestly, the phones have been ringing surprisingly with the courts closed. I was a little bit surprised, but my email would be the best for broad use, huff@hufflegal.com. That's HUF like Frank, F like Frank at hufflegal, LEGAL.com. My phone number will be obtained after anyone wants to reach out to me via email, and I'm happy to connect that way. So thank you guys for having me, and it was a pleasure meeting you.
No, this was awesome.
My
Great
goodness.
meeting you as well, Michael.
Ed, how about
Thank you
you?
so
What's
much.
your information?
Yeah, text is the best way because I'm always in something like right now, 415-368-1149.